Thank you guys for joining once again to a Sunday Superversive Livestream. I'm your host, Ben Wheeler, and I'm here today with my usual co-host, Anthony Marchetta, and acclaimed science fiction author, Brian Niemeier. Wait, Dragon Award? Nominated, aren't you?
And winner.
Winner, that's right. Dragon Award winning author Brian Niemeier, here to talk about a couple of things he's been talking about on his blog, as well as his uber successful Indiegogo combat frame Xseed, and we're all going to tie this up as to why it's important to have good rhetoric against witches and when to backhand them. This might seem quite unconnected, but I assure you, if you'll just follow my magician hands and don't look at the mini mirrors I festooned this laboratory with. Wait, I've lost track of my metaphors, but that's all right. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. And Anthony, how are you doing today?
As good as I have ever been.
Ooh, that sounds unfortunate. But so Brian, talk to us. Talk to us a little bit about these ideas that you've been putting forward together with David Stewart, about the idea of optimates, men who seek the common good, and how we can work it into our art and culture in a way that doesn't end with us gracefully falling into defeat while Rome burns around us.
The idea of the common good has really fallen into neglect over in like the last 5 decades, and trying to rehabilitate it has been a subject of my blogging for a couple of years now. It's been really great and intelligent and curious, because it's like man sharpening man as iron sharpens iron. We've been finding a couple of interesting ideas that we both find intriguing. We've been bouncing them back and forth between each other. Like fruit.
Absolutely. I know that this idea of seeking the common good has been especially taken over by men of communistic and socialistic and other horrible philosophizing fools sort of way, and not in the way of actual common good. It's been used to promote their own version of degeneracy and or violence over what is actually socially good for men.
In like the last century, certainly, but that's really been the main thrust of any pushback I've gotten on this. That, the term common good is a tainted phrase because communists used it to justify atrocities. But if you look at what modern left says and how they couch all their arguments, you never talk about the common good anymore. The thing is, it's framed in terms of consent, right? Making consent the only criterion of the good. And because what we're really dealing with now, ultimately, isn't so much socialism or communism. Those are really undesirable. They've certainly done a lot of damage, but the death cult is an offshoot of big L liberalism that attempt to enshrine freedom as an absolute with no grounding in any intrinsic good to give it value. And have concept of freedom divorced from any concept of the good loses any limiting principle. Self-expression becomes absolute, and then any attempt to limit or restrain self-expression becomes an arbitrary tyranny. It includes the truth. Even the truth seen as tyrannical. Look at the trans movement.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
with
this
that.
whole thing, the issue with consent is something that, I mean, yeah, I'm Catholic. I Thomas Aquinas, common good formulation all the time anyway, but it was after reading Moira Grayland-Peate's book, The Last Closet, that she really, like, I think it was when she worked for a little bit, I think as a dominatrix. She has a section in there where she said this was like the point that convinced me that consent really was a very bad criteria, because there's no such thing as full 100% consent. Everybody is being influenced by things that happen to them beyond their control, whether they want it or not, and that use that as if it's some sort of arbiter for what's good or moral, or things like this, a recipe for disaster in the long term.
Hey, go ahead.
Her book is a really, really great, powerful book. That was one of the more interesting sections of it, I thought.
And Moira and I are mutuals on Facebook. Standing lady, overcame a lot of tragedy in her life. Highly recommend that, especially in the science fiction scene, her book and look into her story. And what you and she are really highlighting is that consent has no inherent content.
Mm-hmm.
It's content free until it's directed toward something concrete. Okay, so that's why anytime anyone says, well, I stand for freedom, always susceptible to the question, okay, freedom to do what? To obtain what? It's like intellectual currency. It's only worth what you can get with it. And trying to separate rights from duties leads to chaos, and getting front row seats for that right now.
Yep. And these sort of rights are not connected to, like what gender or sex you claim to be, or some sort of weird government idea that it of service to you, that it doesn't really exist in that context. And what your responsibilities are towards that government or the people around you. Not that I'm saying blindly follow your own government, but we are given rulers and governors to obey as good citizens, or disobey, depending.
The mistake classical liberals, especially the libertarian mutant offshoot, always make is conflating government abuse with legitimate use of government.
That's true.
Really, it in a nutshell. And okay, if you want to equate abuse with legitimate use, let's talk about gun crime.
Yes.
Because I acknowledge that firearms are misused often. I think even Larry Correa, who's a firearms safety instructor, would agree that abuses and excesses occur, but that doesn't militate against right to bear arms, legitimate use of arms. So really, there's no reason not to scale it up to government itself. It's good. It can be misused or abused by fallen human beings, like any created good, but that doesn't invalidate the entire concept.
Yes, that was one of my big disagreements with Stefan Molyneux, who I know you're aware of. He has this whole thesis. He wrote a whole book on it that somebody actually linked to me and recommended I look at, which I did in the middle of a longer discussion. That's about how the world would be better if there were no governments at all and everything was run by private enterprises, essentially. And the book was a total train wreck. I don't mean to, nasty to Molyneux, who's a very smart person, and I know very little about him. I don't listen to him a ton, but I did read through the book, and it was just a terrible book full of so many assumptions and poor arguments. And the basic error at the heart of the book was this idea that it was impossible for him to imagine any government but a modern neoliberal world order. Like, he just imagined that every single government in all of history ran just as badly, just as corrupt as the modern neoliberal world order. Now, if you were to tell him this, he would deny it, but that was the error I kept seeing crop up over and over, so I can only tell you what I noticed. It's, Molyneux is a pretty fascinating case. He takes libertarian to the logical.
Well, I wonder if he'd change his tune now that his livelihood was almost stripped from him by YouTube, the private company.
That's the eternal question.
More
It's
time?
well, his will Molyneux change his tune now that his income was nearly stripped from him by a private company? Anthony?
That's a good question. Going by what I read in this book, my guess is he'll find a way to blame the government.
I don't know. Like, I give Stefan a little bit more credit than that, for the simple reason that, he is a philosopher. He knows that the government doesn't control YouTube because it's been attacking right-wing sites, right-wing commentators, and even commentators who I would not call right-wing, except in a "you're neighbors with me, so we both live on Martin Luther King Street," unfortunately. And there's all these different implications with living on the same street. However, I do not think that he would necessarily go, "Ooh, that government oppressing me because YouTube's doing this."
Well, you'd know more than me because I really have no opinion of Molyneux himself. I don't listen to him. I don't read him regularly. I can't even remember the title of the book 'cause it was a while ago that I read it. But I read that one book by him, and I know that he's tried to address, people making objections of the type you're saying before, and that's where what I'm saying comes from, where I think that his response would probably be to say that for whatever reason it was the government that caused them to do this, or that they wouldn't have or there would be another service he could jump to if not for government regulations or something like that. I would need to go through the book again too, but I just remember reading the book, somebody trying to argue with me, like, use the book and argue, to be fair, politely. I don't want to go, like, I wasn't arguing with an SJW or anything like that. It was somebody who was legitimately like, hey, take a look, I thought he made a good case. What'd you think? And I read it, and I was like, this book's a train wreck. I have no idea what you're talking about. Uh, it's full of so many bad arguments. And Molyneux, maybe, his overall body of work is a lot more nuanced than what he's displayed there. But going by what I read there, it would lead me to believe they'd find some way to blame the government for the issue.
We keep coming up against it with different ideas of what the government and what other people, and especially our fellow man, is what each one has as his due to his fellow man. With Stefan, we're arguing that whether or not he would blame the government for personal misfortune with a private, admittedly monolithic company or not. Uh, I know that you have had quasi villainous companies in your universe of Xseed. Would you say that they're more libertarian or authoritarian? Uh, Zeklov perhaps being more libertarian, but Browning being more authoritarian, perhaps?
Cyclops was more monarchist.
Well, yes, you're right. It is absolutely monarchist, no question about that. I was couching it, which is monarchism isn't that the it's the connection between right wing and authoritarian. Am I right?
Oh, one
On
of the things that Xseed does is it takes the current political horseshoe, just throws it away.
the
Really, Xseed occurs after a series of global and then even Earth sphere-wide paroxysms that really reduce your choices to, okay, which authoritarianism are you going to have?
no freedom whatsoever.
No, you're falling for preconceptions.
Ooh.
It could be argued that the state is to help an individual, or rather, a nation exercise its freedom for the common good, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, authoritarian state doesn't necessarily rule out freedom. That's to say that I am an authoritarian, but that's based on the presumption that freedom isn't inherently ordered toward anything, and that the will can determine its own good.
Mm-hmm.
That's digress a bit. That's the key mistake that liberalism makes: is that will is a critical faculty, and it's not. It's the intellect.
Right.
The will is an intellective appetite, right? Just like, or physical appetite is a sensible appetite that directs you toward sensible goods. The will directs you toward intellective goods. Okay? It can't determine itself. It needs the intellect, which is the critical function, to tell right from wrong and good from bad. And I broke up there, but a state can have a role in helping to inform citizens' intellects.
Right.
Now, under the case of misrule, or when a state fails in its duty or corrupts it, you have tyranny, and our current public education system is a great example of that.
Mm-hmm.
But because of vastly different needs of the various societies in the Combat Frame Xseed universe, a liberal democracy wouldn't last long. It would last even shorter than they've tended to last in real history.
Yep.
The populace wouldn't survive against the challenges they're facing. So it's more that the coalition is an authoritarian regime in the sense of a nanny state. You know, it's effeminate. Just something I wanted to get into because you asked me to prepare for that for this week. How millennials can combat some of their besetting vices, but that's more. We're gonna this coalition is we're gonna micromanage you. We're gonna have a social credit system. We're gonna have the soft totalitarianism. We're gonna claim,
which is so, their point system is so pervasive. If you do not get enough overtime, you will not get married, unless of course you happen to be an elite. But that's its own thing, I'm sure.
right, and it's not that that's even a hard and fast law. Because again, it's just these soft little catch-22s and roadblocks you run into. So it's not that, okay, you need a social credit score of this high to get a marriage license. It's, oh, you need it to be assigned housing large enough for a single family, right? You need a social
Right.
credit of X and this much income to be approved by your housing coordinator for single family home. And imagine a web of that kind of red tape just completely encompassing each citizen. That's the systems of a terrestrial coalition. It's authoritarian and totalitarian as being all in all. Then you have something like Nouvelle France, Neue Deutschland, are monarchies, so they're authoritarian, but they're nationalist. So it behooves their sovereigns to advance the good of the people. They're authoritarian, but not totalitarian. The state recognizes its sphere, tries to stay in the temporal sphere.
Yep. One of the things I've noticed is in our conversations with other people, and just sort of standing in the back corner of something and watching. And you like how I made that menacing? Is that a lot of Catholics, especially, and other people as well, seem to equate the idea of Protestantism with governmental freedom, which isn't the case. Protestants pretty much latched onto whatever prince would deign to keep them around when it would free them from the temporal power of the Pope, which was more or less deciding who the emperor was by leaning on the elector counts and bishops. Well, the bishops always did whatever the Pope wanted, usually. But
I didn't say that.
What?
I didn't say that, but
Oh,
I do have a
I'm a bit facetious when I say that, but it's
okay, gotcha.
there's
I'll point out I have a comic frame called the Kurfürst in X universe created by a reader. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
yes. But I do want to make sure we're on equal ground. I do not consider freedom a good in and of itself, unless we're talking about freedom from, say, communists, which I think all three of us would agree. Freedom from communists is itself a social good.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely, because of communism's manifest errors is a tyranny, and I mean it's a mentally materialist and atheist. So it's evil.
Yes.
And yeah, and I totally get where you're coming from. I'm not a Catholic who had that misconception of equating Protestantism with like libertarianism, because I mean, for example, look at Geneva under Calvin.
Well, from my understanding, the idea comes from this, which, by the way, Ben, to be clear, when I say this, like, I'm not arguing with you, I agree with you.
Oh, I know. Like, so
Yeah.
there's
But the idea that I think comes from this, the whole idea of what we call separation of powers and freedom of religion and whatever, did come from the Protestant Reformation, but in a less direct way than I think people realize. It was more like they needed to come up with it in order to get everybody to stop killing each other for a moment. So they kind of came up and said, okay, how about this? We're going to have freedom of religion as long as it's some form of Christianity that isn't too heretical.
That's right.
You can have freedom of noticeably similar religions, and in that way, we won't be killing each other while we agree on hopefully the things that are important enough to keep something that as an indirect result of Protestantism, because that's when the wars happened, and then that kind of morphed into a value in and of itself, which is actually not true. What it really was a truce in order to keep society from collapsing into war over and over and over again. And then it turned into something that became like, a good in and of itself, when that's never the case. That was never the case. It was never thought of as the case. It became that way when people forgot that it could be any other way. I don't really have any issue with either a Catholic or a Protestant nation, so long as it's, announced that way from the outset, kind of, and treated that way. But I do have a problem with the idea of separation of church and state, in the sense that religion and the political sphere are completely distant from each other.
Well, there goes that limiting principle again, right? We lost track of what the positive good that religious liberty was established for. As soon as that concept was forgotten, any limits on it were off. And first thing that happened was it was expanded to non-Christian religions, which it was never meant to be compatible with. And as we've seen, and it's caused the West to unilaterally disarm in some compatible religions.
Yep. Because it's like me saying, I would rather die than bow the knee to the Pope is not the same thing as me say is not the same thing as me saying, the freedom of Catholics should not be impugned in the confines of the American states. Nor is it the same as I believe that Islam, a Christian heresy, and I'm willing to die on that hill, which neither of you would argue with me, but it's like, if this is used against me later on, it's like, the Chad yes is going to be my response. It's not the same thing at all. At no point is Islam an equal religion to Christianity. It is not for the social good for Americans to be Muslim. And of course, that includes also the altar of the self, which is probably the true besetting sin of America when it comes to false religions, anyway. At no point is worshiping self a good alternative for Christianity. Or the
It's
worship.
idolatry.
Exactly.
Idolatry, yeah.
Protestants, Orthodox, and good, good Orthodox, good Protestants, good Catholics, all have Christ on the altar of their hearts. We worship nobody else. Trinity, please. Uh, admitting the value of the Trinity as well, because that can be taken out of context. We won't fight over Christ. That means that we can talk about equal social goods. At no point do we have to argue over what's a social good, because we all start from the same philosophical concept of Christ.
Right, who is the epitome and source of the good, the Logos. He is truth. It gets back to what I was talking about, and nicely segued into my hobby horse of the death cult, because they directly derived from removal of any limiting principle on personal expression, even truth. They hate the truth, and boy, do they hate the Christ.
Absolutely.
It's something to behold. Well, I spent the weekend arguing with like Reddit ear atheists and libertarians, and then finally Antifa witches on Twitter, because I was inspired. I was moved by the spirit to come up with a meme, and I found a painting, a street scene by Peter Cornelius, who would do paintings where he would pick like, High Street in Flemish town or something, and just paint the street scene. And so you've got like a 45-degree angle out of like this main street where you've got pedestrian foot traffic, and then keeps hawking their wares on the sides. But then the road always led to central church or cathedral of the town, which is just looming a watchtower over proceedings. And it's not like a twee sanitized Thomas Kincaid. It's earthy. There's a lot of dirty hands. There's horse manure in the streets. There's houses need a new coat of paint, but it's holistic and it's harmonious. Took that picture, captioned it, civilization under our morality. I took the burning McDonald's from Minneapolis and captioned it, civilization under their morality.
Simple, sweet, to the point.
And it's been retweeted like 100 times and has like 400 likes, but did it rustle enemies, jimmies? And I noticed the opposition to it came in waves. So first came libertarians. And let's be honest, at this point, the only people left in libertarianism are folks who weren't smart enough to come to our side after 2016.
Yeah.
So they're basically they're low-tax Democrats. They want to prostitutes and smoke street drugs, but have low taxes.
Right.
They showed up first.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Well, it's like, did you, even libertarianism is easily defeated at this point. Just, by the fact that, so you're saying that, with my low taxes and private business, I could have a private army that will eventually give me authority and control over everything that you do. Well,
So they came first. They were quickly placed by the tipping Reddit atheists. Then they were replaced by the pagan larpers, the tree worshippers, the pine trees.
Right.
Most
sacred groves.
One guy threw shade at me. His handle was actually Thor Odinson. I kid you not. And finally, the actual witches showed up, and they admit it now. That the masks are off. I could show you a screen grab.
Oh, good. You're documenting it.
I'm documenting all this. I document everything. Yeah.
Excellent.
It always comes in so handy later. No, they're just openly saying they're witches. They're in a moral battle against Christianity. They think their moral vision is superior, and they hate us.
Yep.
Hating this. It just shows that isn't a coincidence. All these are related. So I saw the Vanguard, and then like the yeomanry, and then like the junior officers, and then the actual leadership, right? The inner and outer party, like stepping up one by one, and they all had the same cringe take where they totally flew over their heads. They couldn't directly acknowledge what I was talking about, which is that our rulers have abandoned the mainline Protestantism that used to be the soul of America, and that the United States as a nation was founded on for the death cult morality. And it's because their moral vision sees the chaos that is happening around the country now as good that instead I got, well, but the Inquisition and the Crusades and Christianity's done bad things, and I would rather live next to a franchise of the most successful capitalist enterprise of the last century than some useless cathedral. And yeah, they just weren't getting it. It was hilarious.
Yep. It's like, okay, but what happens when that franchise, needs a worker? Like I go to McDonald's and it's like, hey, college and high school kids, we'll literally pay your college education if you'll please work for us. Please. It's getting pretty desperate out here in St. Louis. I can't imagine how it is up near Chicago or in whatever horrible hellhole that is New Jersey. Anthony, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm listening. I'm used to it.
He doesn't even protest.
I don't even. Oh yeah, I don't even react anymore.
And it's like, have you seen the ugly new McDonald's? Not that McDonald's has ever been pretty. It's
they're all brutalist shoeboxes now. Like every restaurant is.
Yeah.
I heard on a Subway near me, and there was no great shakes before, but now it is a gray cube. That's what it is.
There was a good meme from a communist page I follow it understands the sickness that is ultra capitalism as the religion of the person of the state, but it of course is communist, so it doesn't quite get it. But it said it showed a bunch of these shoe boxes, and it's like, but communists will have gray brutalist buildings and it'll be so ugly. And it's a bunch of like, you remember when South Park was doing the Soko Mo joke, where it's like the South hipster district and then the East hipster district, and they all had the same type of building, all had the same sort of thing. It was those buildings.
Okay, I haven't watched TV in years. Take your word for it.
That's fair. I only really watch like South Park and a few other things just to keep track of what people are saying, and occasionally there's a joke that's worth it. Not often, but occasionally. It's I'll take a second just to shout out to Woolly Ram and Underworld Dream. Woolly Ram's back on his night shift, so he can join us again. And Underworld Dream's been sort of in and out on the show. I'm glad you're always with us. So let's shift a bit. So we're talking. We've defined the enemy. The libertarians are kind of the right wing with a certain amount of optics. Then we have the communists and the pagans and the and everything, and then behind them we have the witches. Of course, I believe that the only good answer to witches is fire, and plenty of it. But sadly, we have not yet figured out how to lambast people with fire through their internet monitor. You've had several different engagements with them that have revealed some interesting stuff, including the witch test, which I absolutely wholeheartedly endorse and have used myself on occasion.
Mm.
When these witches bring up Christianity, and they tried to throw shades at us by saying, and confuse the issue by saying Jesus Christ had X belief that he did not have. You have this excellent response. If you could describe that for us.
Yeah, anytime that a clear non-believer attempts to try to cynically force your behavior to strong arm you into doing what they want by invoking some kind of Christian morality, but command that person to confess that Jesus is the Christ and God has raised him from the dead. Because if interlocutor believes in the Lordship of Jesus Christ, it should be easy. In fact, Scripture commands us to make that confession. Blessed is he who takes no offense at me. If you acknowledge me before men, I will acknowledge you, my Father who is in heaven. And on. If the person will not make the confession, then it's someone who is trying to cynically coerce you to taking a position contrary to your interests and is therefore a witch. So you then declare the result of the test and block and ignore the person. I've actually posted an example that happened today in our Discord chat.
Ooh. I will. I need to pause the game first, otherwise I will die. I'll pull it up and have it thrown up on our stream in just a second.
Yeah, I noticed it. It's pretty interesting that people are being so direct about
it. It is. The mask just being thrown off. It's not even slipping.
And which is...
Because that was just the example you're going to say.
Sorry, what?
Go ahead.
And which is itself a little bit sad, annoying, or any other thing. It's at least we no longer have to question what's going on.
And at this point, who doesn't know that the culture war is a spiritual war hasn't been paying attention.
It's true.
Right.
These people don't have a political motive. They don't have a profit motive. They don't even have an ideological motive. It's religious, for want of a better term. I mean, even though they don't believe in God, I forget who it was that said this, but subversive movements can get along just fine without a God, but they absolutely need a devil.
Absolutely.
You gotta have a boogeyman.
And of course, the boogeyman is Christianity, is these these righteous people who say, hey, maybe don't stick your genitals up there. There's diseases. There's this cost to your soul that if you do this thing and if you seek this pleasure, it will destroy you in the end. And of course, this causes them to get their dander up to scream and shout and kick it in. And these people have been with us forever. The Gnostics. I know there's an image going around that was shared to Anthony. What's that Facebook page we like?
Appalling
What's that?
Appalling apostolic meme.
That's right, and it's got where it's this early church commentator going, I was going to this place, but I realized it was full of Gnostics after this cute girl talked to me about it. And of course I revealed them to the church body at large, and we expelled them. Which is great, because rampant thoughtery has always come with these sort of movements. And then we have Arius. I believe we could certainly call Arius a witch of a kind. Then we have the Cathars, who were quote unquote Protestants in their relationship to the Pope, but were certainly heretics and Gnostics first and foremost. And then there's other groups, literal witches, which spread out as the printing press was unregulated, and printed many grimoires which do damage to this day. Autistically printing out fan fictions of devils.
It's continued on to Twitter in a direct chain.
Exactly.
Point out
Yep.
that you can see the quote tweet here. This is only one part of a multi-part conversation with multiple different people, because in my quote tweet, I just gotten done testing and convicting and blocking another witch, and then this witch at Cat Dominates then requested, like, stood up and self-tested, like, oh, I'm a witch, can you block me too? So I did. Not until I capped it and shared it with everyone, saying, see, this is the enemy. When we're up against evil, they admit it.
Yep. And they feel secure enough to do it, because unlike Arius, they probably won't receive a backhand for it.
Oh, and I post, but when they certainly will, if not in this life, in the next. But the death cult isn't built to last. The whole reason I call it the death cult is it seeks to directly undermine the foundations of Western civilization, which it knows on some level it'll go down with the West, but it wants to take a lot of innocent people down with it. It wants to take with it.
Yeah. There's no better way for it. Like, it has to get as many people off the Christian train as possible, as many people away from it and hating it as possible. Otherwise, it will disappoint its father. Even though, yes, even though it is self-destructive, it cannot do anything else, because then their little temporal pleasures, which will not survive them and actively kill them, will no longer be morally justified.
So the death cult is going to burn itself out. The question is, how much damage is it going to do on the way down? And as we're seeing, it's doing a lot of damage.
Oh yeah. It's hurting society. It is hurting this good that we do. It is destroying. Well, it just destroyed a very famous science fiction shop in Minneapolis that had many rare science fiction books in it. I'd never heard of it before, because I'm not that deep in the culture, even though I'm deep in the art of it. But it is.
Uncle Hugo's.
Yes, Uncle Hugo. Excuse me.
That's where Larry Correa got his start.
Really?
You haven't heard about that?
No.
He tweeted it out. That's where I first heard about it the other day. And yeah, how Larry broke in to the science fiction mainstream was so he'd been working as a mod on a Gun Nut forum, and that's where he posted some of his earliest Monster Hunter International stories. The board encouraged him to edit them together into a full novel. So he did. He worked nights writing the first Monster Hunter International, and he initially self-published it and sold it to his Gun Nut fans. Well, somehow or other, either one of them or the friend of a friend from the board knew like a purchasing manager at Uncle Hugo's, and so they ordered a few copies of Larry's self-published MHI. And when the owner saw the monthly sales reports, he called up Tony Weisskopf at Bain, who he's a good friend of, and said, "Hey, I need to tell you about this Larry Correa guy. He has a self-published book that is just flying off our shelves. Like we can't keep it in stock. So you need to have a chat with this guy." And so it was through Uncle Hugo's that Larry was introduced to Tony, and she signed him, and the rest is history. And now Uncle Hugo's is history, sadly. Because the death cult, we can't have nice things.
This is clearly deleterious to society. We, being men of the West and men of Christianity, hate to see this thing because it's like seeing a stained glass window shattered for naught but the pleasure of it. Though I'm sure that, considering how central it is, there might be bodies buried under the floorboards. Who knows? Uncle Hugo, might have a predilection for serial killing, but I sincerely doubt it. It doesn't matter what bodies might be buried under there, what horror stories may be told, it was a social good. And unless somebody comes out that says that he was literally, turning children into high quality leather bound books, it is only good that has been destroyed. Of course, much good has been created from it, just by the fact that Larry Correa was published as far afield as he was. But it's, it's still a sad thing to see it go.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, that came out a little bit more jumbled than I realized. I probably should have paused the game for a second, and cease providing visual entertainment to the noble watchers watching us. But as Christian men, we should only pursue that which is good for society, that which Christ and God requests in the most gentlest of terms us to do. Or else we are both poor men and poor Christians.
Right. And that brings up another objection to restoring the common good and emphasizing the common good over unrestricted license that I've come up against, which is, well, somehow militates against or rules out the individual good.
Oh.
And that's a category error because it rests upon the false notion that the common good is just the aggregate or the sum total of the individual good. So, discussion with another author who leans more individualist, and he said, well, isn't the common good just synonymous with each individual acting for his own enlightened self-interest? And no, that's not what Aquinas means by the common good, for example.
I mean, it's easily disproven by saying pedophiles act according to their own enlightened best interest. Like it's such an easily refutable argument that it's like serial killers act in their own enlightened self-interest.
Who cheats on a test?
Yes.
Will never get caught, right? Yeah. So it's moral relativism. It's religious nihilism, and I mean, and sometimes even admit it. They're like, well, but I have a different definition of the good than you do. I'm like, well, then you're evil. You're kind of evil because you don't know what the good is.
Yep.
Just an admission that you don't believe in objective universal good, or think it can't be known. And either way, you can't build a functioning society. So
this is something
yes,
that I end up. Go ahead.
No, Anthony, go for it.
I was done.
This is something that I end up coming up against a lot in criticism and discussions of that nature. This idea of, and I know this is not, by the way, the exact same thing because we're talking about moral good right now and good of society, but about this denial that there's such a thing as a good that exists. And when I say I know that I'm talking about good as it refers to criticism, but these two things are very, very closely connected, which I think is one of the main reasons I disagree with a lot of the critical community on this subject. The idea that there's such a thing as an objective good and an objective bad thing in terms of art and art criticism. That's because it's connected very closely. The idea of
Intimately.
moral good, yes, extremely closely, and the idea that it's disconnected from the idea of moral good or good of society or good for, even self and country and things like that is an absolute falsehood. You can't. They're connected. They're all, they're not the same thing, but they're interrelated, very interrelated. Aesthetic good is something that exists, and it exists on a wavelength that's very similar to that of moral good. Can't just completely disconnect if one has nothing to do with the other.
Oh, well, the statement, good art is subjective. What is subjective? Because by using word good, using language, assume that word has an inherent meaning that's accessible to me. Otherwise, you might as well say, well, Smurfy art is subjective.
Right.
Chi art is subjective. Now the fact that you're using the word, you're assuming that the good is a thing and we can both know what it is. So, yes, good has an objective, universal meaning that is accessible to human reason.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like,
the way that I think of it, though, it's this idea that you could separate it completely from this idea that there's such a thing as a moral good, or there's, and I've talked about this, like, with Christians too, who also have tried to argue with me that there's no such thing as an objective way to judge, or, objective good or bad in art. But I think that the mistake is acting as if it's something that's completely disconnected, unrelated to the idea of moral good. It's not. It all comes from the same place. It all comes from those same general principles, just applied in a different way. What makes something morally good and what makes something aesthetically good aren't unrelated.
Right, of course not. Well, the good is simply in an art, it's performing work to the standard of that art. Yeah, that's what the good consists of in an art. Morally, the good is simply excellence in conduct. So, and both are just the application of an objective standard outside the actor. I mean, even Abraham Maslow, the developmental psychologist, pointed out that recognizing the existence of a morality outside the individual, but is still binding, is a necessary step in human maturity. People who deny that are just infantilized, or at most, they're perpetual adolescents.
Yep. It's also like, if we say that, true good art is subjective, it's like, well, why did everyone like Wagner back in the day? Or if they did not like Wagner, they still were a big fan of Beethoven. To say that, while your enjoyment of the art may be subjective, it is certainly not subjective that there is great art and that it can be even quantified to a point.
Right. Yeah, and that is sleight of hand that these critics Anthony is talking about pull, is they slyly substitute preference for the good. Because one's a preference statement, one's a value statement. So they just rule out question of value or any measure of value out of hand. And well, that painting is beautiful. That painting is good. And by rephrasing it as if you'd said, I like that painting. Categorical difference between saying, say, that painting exhibits symmetry and radiance and internal harmony, and I like vanilla ice cream.
Absolutely.
Yeah, only an ignoramus would inflate the two statements. That's what art critics do every day.
Unfortunately. Because it's it's if I may, there's almost certainly a connection then between moral excellent high class art and a moral excellent high class society.
Yes.
Right.
Which means that one of the battles that we'll eventually have to soundly and utterly defeat is the artist's subjective argument. Of course, objectively good art, like say, for example, Combat Frame Xseed, which is an Indiegogo I've linked in the comments and chat, is certainly worth
Thank
your
you.
time, and it's certainly morally valuable to read something that has a strong moral current to it. God, Robot, my own Tears of Elfland, and Cheek of Mars have incredibly strong and clear moralities. At no point can somebody say, the prince from the Sheik of Mars is not a Muslim, or the main character of the Sheik of Mars, Harun Rashid, is not a Christian. They can't say that. Or with the family from the Tears of Elfland, they are Christian. Um, it isn't as explicit in Combat Frame Xseed, but in CY40 Second Coming, there are times when they stop. The soldiers are having mass after a battle. These people are praying before a battle. It is the removal of religion from science fiction has itself been a gaping wound that hopefully we can close in this generation, and it'll make future battles so much easier.
Man, and yeah, let me take that segue to talk about the book you just plugged, Comet Frame Xseed S. It's the first installment in a brand new series in the Xseed saga. Picks up about 60 years after the CY arc ended, and yeah, the initial seeds of spiritual renewal that we do see in the first three books have come to fruition by then. So religion has really emerged out from under the shadow of the coalition. People take it far more seriously. And as I mentioned, nation states like Nouvelle France and like Neue Deutschland and center now.
Mm-hmm.
And their national identity very much includes their people's religion.
Absolutely. And it's a good way to even explore like different societies and different thoughts. Like, what does a Catholic society versus an Orthodox society versus a Protestant society look like? Like, it's the way a Protestant is going to handle a colony is going to be similar to. It's going to be very high moral standard, high sort of culture, but like, I don't want to say pragmatic, I don't want to say practical, but it is in a way, pragmatic, practical plane. To a Catholic thing where it's like, okay, guys, we're no longer starving to death on this alien world. Let's build that basilica, and everyone cheers. Like, it's
And
a
then
hmm?
then you have Mars. I this one off the rails here. Mars is an independent world, which is also a nation state, but they have their own man-made religion put together by the man who does style himself the God Emperor of Mars, and he is the God King of his national cult. Is in its own liturgies and beliefs.
As you do.
Yeah,
It's
emotions are
beautiful.
fun.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. I can't wait for this book. I did purchase, just fair thing, a build your own mech for this place. Uh, I'm absolutely looking forward to working with that on that with you. But there's
Oh,
it's um we are certainly moving into a time when, as people say, well, the true religion is apparently uh, paganism, which has two sources and a whole bunch of bodies buried in bogs, and some Viking tombs raided, of course. Um, versus 2,000 years of people who agree on 99% of everything and then will kill each other over 1% because it's important, damn it.
I can't wait
Versus
till we can get back to that.
I
Anyway, sorry, go
know,
ahead.
I know, I know, I know, I know, me too.
Steer my friends. Anyway.
But also, like versus, Islam, which certainly, is going to be the heavyweight champion of this current, if I'll say story arc, um, of the Christian revival, which I pray someday comes. It's it's hard to like talk about these things, seeing these things on the horizon, where the pagans will be like, okay, we'll convert back. You know, there's no high priest crazy enough to do it. Like, yeah, okay, you got us. They'll come back. The witches won't come back, but at the very least, we might be able to pull some of their souls back out of the fire. Um, like I've noticed physical deformity goes with it, almost hand in hand, like glove. Because I do believe that there's a spiritual nature to physical malformity that isn't genetic. Like, I'm a big guy. I suffer from the sin of gluttony. I've cooked up like a third of a pork belly. I'm not going to eat it all tonight because I do have some restraint. But it's a struggle because this pork belly's delicious. Um, it's a struggle to dominate my appetites. And my body shows this. I believe that a society could have the same thing. These sicknesses, and I'm bringing it all the way back around downtown to home plate. Uh, I believe that the sicknesses we're seeing as a society is because men have given up the common good. It was the common good in the Wild West days to have a church, to have a school run by, of course, a cute and single school marm. Uh, to have all these good things to happen, and then when the bandits or the Indians or the what have you, come through, hire a bounty hunter, have a police force, have the sheriff. There's no place for savages in a civilized society.
We're finding that out. We're relearning that lesson.
Absolutely. And the unfortunate thing is that these aren't like the civilized golden age, quote unquote, Islamic groups that are coming, and these are, the poor, war torn fanatics who would join ISIS if it wasn't guaranteed a burial by drone strike at this point.
Hmm.
It's travelers and journalists and stuff like that. I say journalists as in people who write in a journal about their wonderful travels in strange and distant lands, not the current rat that we generally think of. It seems like the entire world's less civilized than it once was, if I'm being honest. Even places on the rise like China isn't all that great.
China, what just got done building people into their own apartments?
Yes. And 1,000 other things. What I always get surprised with is that they got utterly wrecked by the coronavirus, but it's like, but us, it's barely a couple times worse than flu season, um, and on the downing trend. But
Thank God.
hmm,
See, what happened? I always hear about China. People have been trying to sell me for years now, really like probably decades at this point, that China is on its way up and it's right there. It's about to be the number one power, and it's always getting better, and they're always so much better. And so far, it has not happened. It just keeps not being the case. China is always getting there. It's always getting better. It's getting more powerful. It's getting more moral, which it's not. it's getting more moral, but it's mysteriously never seems it always seems to be frozen in getting better mode without actually showing any noticeable signs.
It's because it hasn't been Christian.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yet.
I'm very suspicious. I am extremely suspicious of it. You know, I hear, oh, they're so much more moral than America. And don't get me wrong, I have no interest after everything that we've talked about, especially and all of that, in defending America. But I'm like, you keep telling me that China is trending in the right direction, but it has been it's supposedly been doing that for how long now, and yet I've seen no actual noticeable change. You know, I see a glorified cold virus rip through their smog-infested cities like tissue paper. And you're telling me that I need to be more afraid of them. Or that, you know, look at China, sure, they're bad, but they're trending in the right direction as they persecute, as they murder however many more Christians today. And I'm like, okay, you know, maybe
it only makes us stronger.
The first time. Yeah.
It does, and you're right. Because
you're right about that, but maybe I would have bought this the first time I heard it, but now, like, at what point am I just not going to believe the hype when it comes to China? I'm kind of there.
Pursuant to what Benjamin just said, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, and Christianity in China is growing, and that's an incontrovertible trend. Getting back to what I said, the reason that China made all these innovations, like in mathematics and astronomy, and they developed gunpowder before anyone else, but the scientific method was really stillborn there, was their native philosophies were either cyclical or have either a cyclical or steady state view of the universe. They didn't think anything ever really changed. Okay. And like the fusion and Dallas Philosopher said, yeah, there might be physical laws, but we can't discover them. They're above human ken. You know, they're the domain of the gods, so there's no point in investigating them because they could change tomorrow. And voluntarist idea. But the advantage Europe had was Christianity would said, no, we believe in a God who not only is rational, he is reason, he's logos, and he works through secondary causes that are discoverable. So that's why Europe succeeded where the East and the Middle East failed, where these ideas failed to take root. Now, in China, the church is growing. It's growing so fast that China is going to be the largest Christian nation on earth by 2050.
Absolutely.
That's so I'm keeping my eye on them because you're right. Like all these other pundits who said, "Oh, China's on the grow. Watch out." Well, not while they stay atheist materialists, but the one factor that throughout history has been determinative in whether civilization can break through that dead end, which is Christianity, is on the rise there. With the church is on the rise, and keep your eye on it because, like, China plus the intellectual bounty of Christianity, it's not going to result in the West, right? It's not going to be a carbon copy of what we had. It's going to be interesting, and I take some comfort in knowing that even if we fall, right, even if the West does fall, which could happen now, honestly seems likely. Well, I mean, God will, like, the church will go where she's welcome.
Yep.
Right. We have the promise that the gates of hell will never prevail. So if our people rejects the church, he'll give it to a people who are willing to welcome her, and then they're going to do great things.
And the thing is that they're not even going to be this like brand new society. They will literally sift through our ashes, take all of our books and best things, and improve on them. Like where we just touched on the moon, there's almost a guarantee that they'll go all the way to Mars and beyond.
Hopefully they do the same thing with Comet Frame Xseed. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
But absolutely. You know, it's, we see a dim, so like there's short, medium, long. We see a very dim short-term future, and rightly so. Unless God moves the spirit and takes all of us by storm, where all of a sudden I'm wearing camel hide in the middle of St. Louis preaching, and converting the riotous masses. The short term is going to be very hard. Pray and keep your powder dry. Which apocryphal, but I love the quote anyway. A Protestant, Oliver Cromwell, a Protestant hardcore enough to cancel Christmas. But it's, medium term, it looks pretty good. Like China, hopefully China, God willing, becomes that Christian superpower we want it to. And, unfortunately, I don't really see it be a missionary superpower like Protestantism was in like the 1850s to
Right.
1920s, I want to say. And even now, like, it's not, we never talk about it. We barely remember our own martyrs, but almost every church supports 3 to 5 missionary families out in the wild somewhere doing things. And they come back every couple years or so to talk about all the great things they're doing. It's absolutely amazing. And I'm sure
I would recommend. I recommend for you then Fox's Book of Martyrs.
Oh, we definitely have a copy of that. I was only referring to Protestant martyrs, not early church fathers.
It is Fox's Book of Martyrs is Protestant martyrs.
Really? I always thought it was Catholic.
It's the Protestants heard under Mary Tudor, James Scotland. I'm pretty sure.
This is to my shame. I have thought that it was Catholic for years. I will read it for sure then.
You're wrong. I'm going to double check. Acts and Monuments, properly known as Fox's Book of Martyrs, is a work of Protestant history and martyrology by Protestant English historian John Fox, published in 1563. John Day.
I'm absolutely going to have to read it for myself then.
Anyway, but I digress.
I'm such a Protestant, I even avoid other Protestants for fear of being Catholic.
There's a chance to broaden your horizons a little bit.
No, but yes, all right, that's fair. I do hope that I'm wrong about China, and they do send out missionaries to the world. And I hope they send missionaries back to us. I've heard of such a thing being done on occasion, especially to the inner city, from like Europe and stuff like that.
Large parts of America are Christian territory. I mean, I talked to some of these witches or just pine tree worshippers or fedora tippers on Twitter, and even the faintest idea of what a Christian even is. They've clearly never even spoken to one.
Yep.
Like their entire concept of a Christian is a Stephen King villain.
Children of the Corn. Sir, that's only the Mennonites. Come on.
Well, they don't know they're different denominations even, because anyone who mentioned any denomination assumed I was an evangelical Protestant, because they're okay. That's the Republican voter base in flyover country, and that's one flavor.
It's
even though they don't know, and I mean that's the definition of a dark age.
It's true. One of the things before all this got started, I actually had kind of a crisis of faith, like before I became a Superversive and joined up with these guys, is that I felt like an uncivilized man in a civilized world. When when you look at it, now that I've become older and I've learned much more than I did before, that I was a civilized man in an uncivilized world, wondering what I was doing wrong. Because I had that internal good. As men of the West, as Christians, as optimates, we know instinctively that XYZ is good for society, but drag queen story hour, pride parades, and unlimited immigration is bad for society. I'll say, because I gave concrete examples, I'll give concrete examples of good. Free and open public libraries. A well-maintained infrastructure. Family dynamics. All of the husband-wife variety. All three of those, by their very nature, improve society.
Here.
Of course, these will follow up into space. Brian, give us your opinion. Is a robust and well-funded space program a good for society?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Fantastic.
It gives us the chance to.
The sci-fi author said so. I'm shocked.
It gives us the chance to. It's an avenue by which we can expand our knowledge of God's creation, and being is good, right? Everywhere we find being, we find truth to learn about it. Good is being is truth, and that's why exploration is a good. It's intrinsically good.
I love it.
We can learn whether ants can be trained to sort tiny screws in space.
Answer is yes.
That would be kind of amazing.
But you need enough honey and enough mazes and a mad sociologist.
Revolutionize every industry from watchmaking to watch repair.
I mean, unfortunately, I would rather make watches though.
It's going to revolutionize that.
Absolutely.
In good shape.
Well, this has been let's see, how long have we been going on? Ooh, well over an hour.
No, that's long. Yeah.
Brian?
No, I was just about to say what you said. You're good.
Yeah. There's it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Brian. It really refreshes the spirit. Apparently, I do have to read Fox's Book of Martyrs. I am embarrassed. We've seen a lot. We've talked about a lot, and even though we've been kind of dancing around it, this is us talking about the ideas and philosophies and the concrete sort of feeling behind being an optimates, being a Christian, being a man of the West, being for the good of the society that we're in, specifically our society, which is the best society, and not promoting a society that's more deleterious, more destructive towards body and soul, more oppressive to women, more not that we're oppressive to women at all, and I mean that unsarcastically. We are not. If you compare us to literally every other society that's ever been, these people who would be slaves enjoy unlimited freedom compared to being chattel in, say, Islam, or being a higher form of animal in the East. It's
indeed. I'm voicing agreement.
Absolutely, and this is the good type of freedom, a freedom to be not some sort of thing, but a person, and a souled person, and a person with a relationship to God that is neither oppressed, but rather brought forward into full flowering and maturity. It's all these things may be lost for a time. Who knows? But it certainly doesn't mean that we should not just give up and stop, fighting and just be like, well, I got mine. See ya. No, we're here to create value for our fellow optimates, our Christians, our men of the West. and it's not an easy task because there's a lot of infighting and there's a lot of jackanapery, and 1,000 other things that we'll have to overcome. But I know that, since we're all in agreement, we'll all fight for the right track and the right outcome, which hopefully we'll see in our lifetimes. But you know,
Well, the sun God acknowledges, God chastises, right?
mm-hmm.
And we're seeing now fits the pattern recorded throughout history and in scripture. When God's people go astray, what does he do? Like, what's his sternest timeout punishment? It's he finds the most loathsome, odious enemy of that people and sets them to rule over them to teach them a lesson.
Yep.
Happens again and again.
Mhm.
And that's what the death cult is.
Mm-hmm.
These Puritan SJW school marms are the worst people on earth. And but dominating us. So what does that say about us? Right? It's an invitation to
Yep.
grow in humility.
Yep. Absolutely. It's like if we come out of this alive and with our books and our philosophies intact, and we don't learn anything about what we've just been through, it is absolutely not to be borne. Almost
Really.
angering, the idea of it. But uh honestly though, I to our credit, I don't think it's been the same thing as it has been in other times and other generations. So I compared to like worshiping Baal literally, or being or inviting the Assyrians in to fight the Egyptians, or our neighbors to the south, or any other thing like that. At least it's different this time, but it's the same.
Well,
It's always the same.
pretty big into Moloch worship, though.
That's 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 true, but I said Baal, not Moloch. Okay, all right, it's different. Uh, that's me being facetious, but even though it is all from Satan, you know, I don't know. I don't know. Could I burn down a witch's house if it was like 700 BC? I like to think I could. That nice little 140 character reply and fire. I'm just saying. The more I think about it. But I'm joking about it. Unfortunately, we won't see that sort of thing in a bit. But it's does it improve
Well,
society? Go for it.
I had a teacher. I remember when we were learning about this was in high school and in theology. For whatever reason, the Salem witch trials had come up, and I forget like said it or why or whatever, but it could have been me, it could have been a classmate, said something like, they thought they were witches or whatever, which is why they reacted that way. And my teacher, and I will never forget this, responded with total, like, complete seriousness. It was only an overreaction if there's no such thing as witches. And that stuck with me. The whole reaction to the Salem witch trial, like, it was this massive overreaction. He said, no, it's an overreaction if there's no such thing as. Now, we know the Salem witch trials, and they're well documented, so we know that most of the people who were convicted were innocent. But that's not the same thing.
Right.
They were probably, anyway, to my knowledge, innocent, but that's not the same thing as saying that the reaction to accusations of witches was not justifiable. I'll never forget him telling our class that, and he was like dead serious. And the students followed up and asked him about it, and he's like, yeah, no, I mean, everybody acts like it, they're these backward superstitious people, but that's really only true if witches aren't real.
And they are. I mean, we photographic evidence right there.
Good point.
Yep. And it's unfortunate. You never want to see it, but we're stuck with it, and now we have to live with the times we have. And if it wasn't these times, it would be Nazis, or it would be depression, or it would be, the Gilded Age, where everything looks great, but it's actually kind of fake, or plagues, or Rome falling, or Christian persecution. 1,000 different little things that we could live through, but we live through this now. And as I've grown older, I've become accustomed to it and accepted it more than I have before.
But don't worry, the SJWs will be replaced with something worse.
I mean, couldn't we have serious transhumanists? Come on.
Oh,
Ghost in the Shell.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're talking about with the space program. There are certain personnel and financial problems with that now.
What? Wait. Go ahead.
NASA is basically, if you talk to anyone inside NASA, it's basically affirmative action jobs program now. But thankfully, private business is picking up the slack, and I gotta take a minute to do a victory lap here, because I've had readers tell me with the SpaceX launch, wow, the backstory of Comet Frame Xseed is coming true, right? The elites they're convincing Elon Musk is building this rocket is an escape craft where civilization on Earth collapses. Like, yeah, that's what consortium that the coalition did. And then they tell me, yeah, wow, Nick Cole and Jason Onspach predicted the elites would do the same thing in Galaxy's Edge. I'm like, yeah, but I wrote mine 14 years. I wrote mine 14 years before they did, though. How long ago I wrote the first outline of Xseed.
Right. I mean, here's the thing. It's a pretty good idea in and of itself, though. Like, do you not think Bono is a low enough character that when the going gets good, he's going? Like, it's...
I know it.
Like playing on a O'Neill cylinder, hurtling through space, sold out. Put him on the master screen so everyone has to watch him. Of course. Now, what sort of savage society would come from a Bono centered society? I don't even want to know.
I have a good idea too, because I followed you two for years before they went totally sideways. And keep in mind, he's one of those guys like with Sting and Bob Geldof, who was agitating for the end of apartheid and just castigating white South Africans. And wow, gee, look how that turned out. Where people are being torn apart with power. Farmers have to get guard lions. Okay. Oh, and by the way, speaking of the coronavirus, South Africa has become the only known nation in the history of the world to specifically deny a particular portion of their population pandemic protections based on race. Think about that.
Not even surprised.
Even if you don't think Roshan was a threat, back when we didn't know as much about the virus, only had the Chinese lockdown to go on, and we thought this, could be the real deal. The African National Congress was keeping pandemic protections away from white South Africans. So,
yep.
Yeah, I have an idea we're a Bono-centric society.
All right. Brian, what's your final word for us?
All right, well, keep your powder dry, and if I always like to try to close on a positive note. So unlike the shock jock YouTubers that just make a living from complaining about the death cult's depredations of pop culture, it, documented it, and then figured out how to do something about it. So you can check out my book, Don't Give Money to People Who Hate You. I've actually got not only thorough dissection of the problem, but actual advice for what to do about it and what you can do to both break free of the death cult, but also contribute, if you are so disposed, to revitalizing culture, bring about a Christian revival for the resuscitation of the concept of objective beauty in the arts. And also, I put my money where my mouth is by making my own art. So go back and comment from Xseed. If you're new to the series, don't worry, because every perk tier automatically gets the digital editions of the entire first series for free. Use no barrier to entry.
Love it. Anthony, what do you got for us? Oh, sorry. Keep going.
That's all I got.
Excellent. But in a good way. I put the link down below in the chat. So do check it out. You know, it's great. You'll love these books. Anthony, what do you got for us?
What I got is I recently brought Don't Give Money to People Who Hate You. It's very good. Highly recommended so if anybody is interested in figuring out what we should be doing and why we should be doing it, take a look at that. If you're not interested in the fiction, it's a very useful book in terms of finding a direction and a way to go in the culture war.
At least now we're moving forward where we need to go. Where before I don't think we could say that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And there's no really better way for us to end it. We're moving in the right direction. We're pursuing the right things, and we're pursuing Christ. We wish to defeat the death cult. We know who the enemies and the enemy forces are. We mentioned Sun Tzu earlier in this. We know ourselves. And now we know the enemy. And eventually we'll reach that point where we're undefeated in 1,000 combats. Thank you both for joining us. Anthony, as always. Brian, you're always welcome back on the show. Have a good one, folks. Stay safe out there. And for those who are within the rioters, we will pray for you. Good luck, Bradford. Pray and keep your powder dry. Have a good one.